Kia ora, postgraduate research student. I'm Nigel Harris. I'm the Dean of the Graduate Research School, and this is a brief introductory session to what Format 2 theses and dissertations look like at AUT, and something for you to discuss directly with your supervisor as to which format you'd like to take as you submit your work. So you may be aware there are three different formats at AUT, 1, 2 and 3. Format 1 is the traditional structure: substantive introduction, methods, results, discussion and conclusion. Format 2, which we'll talk about today, includes manuscripts that you are either going to submit or have submitted. And Format 3, practice-led, which you probably know about already if you've got a supervisor who has expertise in that area. So just a few quick notes on why you as a postgraduate research student might choose to work on your thesis or dissertation using Format 2. The first one is that you do get feedback as you go along the way from beyond your supervisory team, and that is that if you submit work for submission at a journal or to a conference, of course they get peer reviews. That work gets peer reviewed, normally by 2 reviewers, and that feedback can be really, really useful. Often it will lead you to changing your work, and it makes it better by the time you finally submit your thesis. So that's a useful part of it. The second thing is that when you come to your examination, if you do get to the point where you've got a publication out there, or more than one publication, it can be a good impression on the examiner or the examiners. But I do want to state that the examiners at AUT, or the examiners for AUT theses and dissertations, they look at your overall thesis or dissertation. They don't examine your published work. But if it's in a reasonable journal, then generally that will have a good impression on them, and that's not a bad thing. It's great for you to learn the game. Peer review process can be extensive. Sometimes it's a little bit frustrating or exasperating, and for you to sit next to, metaphorically or literally, your supervisory team and work through the process of dealing with feedback from reviewers, it'll only strengthen you as an academic, and really that's what doing postgraduate research is all about: becoming a more independent or totally independent academic researcher, and publishing as you go will only serve that very well. For you as a student, having specific milestones is really useful, and so sometimes you can get distracted by working on all sorts of different pieces on your thesis at once, to focus exclusively on one chapter, one publication, and so, okay, in 6 to 8 weeks' time, my goal is to submit to the Journal of ABC, and that's all I'm doing. So I'm looking at the author guidelines of that journal, and I am planning to submit an article of 4,000 or 5,000 words, whatever it is, to that journal. And that can enable you to focus on one component and not get distracted by all sorts of other things in your thesis. It's great for your profile, whether or not you go to academia or back to practice after your qualification. It's also, of course, really good for you to have a publication with your name on it, usually as primary author. And it's good for your supervisory team. They'll usually co-author with you by mutual agreement, and it's good for them as well. So it's nice to be able to work together with them on producing a piece of research that's in publication and you're both proud of. So what I've done here is given you one example, and this is just from a former student of mine. The surname you can see at the top left hand side. You can look this up on Tufera, the open access repository within Te Mata Puna, our library. It's totally accessible. There's the spelling of the surname there. So the red arrows indicate chapters within this is a doctorate, a PhD, within this thesis that were not published, and the green arrows are chapters that were published. Now, two key points here. Number one is, in Format 2, you don't have to have every chapter published. That's fine. Not every chapter is suitable for publication, and not every chapter will be published, and that's okay. Secondly, those 3 green arrows on chapters 3, 4, and 5, not all of them were published by the time of the submission. So this particular student submitted his thesis, only chapter 3 at that particular point in time had been published. Chapter 4, I think, had been submitted. Chapter 5 hadn't quite yet been submitted yet. Eventually they all got published, and some of them got published before the oral examination. Others, or I think chapter 5 in particular, got published afterwards. That's okay. So if you look at it fundamentally, you can see that there is the usual start material, where you can see the postgraduate handbook to guide you on how that looks. Chapter 1, you can see, sets up the thesis. It's not designed for publication. It sets up the overarching aims and objectives and structure of the thesis. It was never intended to be a publication. In this particular thesis, chapter 2 was a standalone piece of work, but it never really was going to suit a publication, and it wasn't designed for that. However, it served the thesis well, and that's fine. Chapters 3, 4, and 5, you will see, look like they have their own structure, introductions, methods, results, discussions, and conclusions, each one of them. And that's good. That's the way the structure works. They're each a publication, or designed to be a publication. And the final chapter 6, in this particular doctorate, never designed to be a publication. It brings the whole thesis together. And that's a really important part of a thesis, is bringing it together. What does it all mean at the end? Wrap it all up, synthesize it, give the overall application, the limitations, the future research directions, and there's some repetition involved in that, and that's all right. You would have said a lot of it already within the prior chapters, the introductions and the discussion and conclusion. That's okay, but bringing it together at the end succinctly in format 2 is important. So that's an example, and I'll just show you a few more details within that particular thesis. And the first is this. What did it look like in the thesis itself? It looked like this. It was the Word version of the publication. Here's the publication that eventuated from it. That was not put in the thesis, so you don't take the PDF of the final journal article and pop it into your thesis. That would breach a lot of copyright regulations, almost always. And so basically what you're doing is presenting in your thesis the raw Word, or whatever program you use, version of the article. Here's another example from chapter 5, and this one got published later, so that's obviously the final publication. But this was what was in the actual thesis when it was submitted, and you can see it says here this chapter comprises a paper that was in preparation for publication, and etc, etc. There are a few differences. You'll notice the difference in the title, and that was because after peer review we had to make some changes, which is perfectly normal. And so the paper changed a little bit, or the manuscript changed a little bit from what was in the thesis to what was eventually in publication, and that's fine and normal. Now, a few more regulations. You will get these directly from the postgraduate handbook. I'm not going to give you the page numbers because they can change from time to time, but you can get all of this online. The first one is, what does a manuscript mean, or manuscript structure mean? Well, it means this. Manuscripts according to AUT for format 2 can be in preparation for submission, so they might not have even been submitted yet, actually submitted, obviously actually published, or equivalent in your discipline. For example, in the IT field it might be a conference publication, not a peer-reviewed journal article. It's all slightly different, but for the most part it's a peer-reviewed research article. It's got to be part of work that you do as part of your publication. It can't be something that you've produced before you arrived at AUT or in a previous qualification at AUT. It has to be part of your masterate or your doctorate that you're enrolled in. If you're doing a thesis, so that's from 90 points upwards to a PhD of 360 points, you need to have 2 manuscripts as defined in the previous page. If you are doing a dissertation or a project, so that's less than 90 points, you've got to have a minimum of 1 that meets that prior definition. Normally, as the student, you will be the principal author. Well, no, always you'll be the principal author, but normally that means that you are the primary author. That's something to check with your supervisor in your discipline. There are a few nuances around, but not many. Almost always you're the primary author on that piece of work. And there's a signed declaration that goes with that, you can see in the handbook. I've already said this, but there is going to be some repetition across the introduction, into the main chapters, and then into the final conclusion or the wrap-up of the thesis, the dissertation. That's okay. You're not normally copying things again, but it's kind of hard sometimes to say the same thing in a different way when you've already said it in the introduction and the discussion of the papers or the manuscripts that you've submitted, and that's all right in Format 2. It's got to be cohesive, so give it a start, give it an end, give it a cohesion. It is a thesis or a dissertation that you're submitting, not just a paper or two that you've submitted that happen to be sort of somewhat related. So bring it together, link it. One way to do that is to include what's called a preface, and that is where you briefly explain to the reader, or most importantly to your examiners, what the linkage is between the last chapter and the next chapter. You don't need to do that on the introduction section of the thesis, but you would do it on the main chapters, the ones that you are submitting for manuscripts. There's an example there. They're only brief, paragraph, maybe 2 maximum. This one I'm showing you is quite a long one. But the idea is to say, here's what I've done so far in my thesis, and here's what I'm about to do. That's the subject of the next chapter. Be careful about copyright. Always check, and as part of that, think about an embargo. And so the last thing that you have to do to be eligible to graduate with your qualification for a thesis in particular, or in most dissertations, not all of them, is submit to TUFERA, the open access repository. Now, if there is material within your thesis that is designed to be published but has not yet been published, just be a little bit careful. It's wise to look at embargoing, and that's a very easy thing for your supervisor to do, the chapter that's not published yet. And the reason for that is that what can often happen from publishers and journals is you submit it, goes to the Journal of ABC, and they'll look it up online and find that it's already out there on TUFERA. It's already on an open access repository. They might refuse to publish it. They don't always do that, but it can happen. So for your own protection, talk with your supervisor about embargoing anything that's designed. You can just do it by chapter for a publication but hasn't been published yet. Okay, thank you, postgraduate research student, for listening. I hope that's given you just a brief introduction to Format 2. It's certainly something to think about. Discuss it with your supervisor, and the Graduate Research School team are always there to help you with any questions that your supervisor might not be able to assist you with. All the best, and I look forward to seeing you graduate.